A single father took his son to the park when the boy ran up to a stranger shouting, "Mommy!" In that moment, secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story of mystery and reunion that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment on where you are watching from. The Sunday sun poured its golden light over Central Park, creating patches of shadow and brightness among the leafy canopies of the ancient trees. The air was filled with the irresistible aroma of donuts being fried at the nearby stalls, mixed with the sweet scent of blooming cherry blossoms that were starting to open that March morning. Families from New York spread out across the lush green lawns, creating that warm and welcoming atmosphere typical of weekends in the largest city in the country. David Johnson, a 35-year-old man with slightly graying brown hair at the temples and almond-shaped eyes that carried the weight of many responsibilities, walked slowly along the gravel path leading to the playground. His hands, calloused from his work as a civil engineer, firmly held the small fingers of Ethan, his 4-year-old son. The boy bounced alongside him, his dark eyes shining with anticipation as he watched the other kids playing on the colorful equipment in the distance. "Dad, can I go on the big slide?" Ethan asked, his high-pitched voice cutting through the park's chatter. His brown curls bounced as he excitedly pointed to the red and yellow structure that stood out in the center of the play area. David felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the mix of unconditional love and constant anxiety that had accompanied him since he became a single father 2 years ago, since Sarah had disappeared from their lives without explanation, leaving only a vague note about needing to find herself. He had been carrying the world on his shoulders. Every decision, every moment of fun, every little joy or worry of his son rested entirely on him. "Of course, champ. But stay where I can see you, okay?" David replied, adjusting the backpack he carried with water, snacks, and all the safety items a caring father always kept close. His voice carried that protective tone he had developed, firm but affectionate. Ethan dashed toward the playground with the typical energy of a child his age, his colorful sneakers thumping against the rubberized ground that cushioned his steps. David followed at a slower pace, his eyes never losing sight of his son, watching every movement with the vigilance of an experienced bodyguard. Then she appeared. Across the park, a woman in her early 30s gently pushed a pink stroller. Her brown hair flowed in natural waves, swaying lightly in the morning breeze, framing a face with delicate features, but marked by an expression of serenity earned through many battles. She wore a simple white blouse and faded jeans, with comfortable sneakers that hinted at long walks around the neighborhood. In the stroller, a baby of just a few months slept peacefully, shielded from the sun by a small umbrella decorated with blue cloud patterns. Emily Smith had been a kindergarten teacher for over 10 years, and her experience with children shone through in the gentle way she organized the toys scattered in the stroller and adjusted the blanket covering little Lily. Her light brown eyes had that characteristic sweetness of someone who dedicated their life to caring for little ones, but they also carried a subtle melancholy, as if holding memories she preferred to keep buried. The park buzzed with life around them. Vendors offered cold lemonade, their voices blending with the sounds of children shouting with joy on the playground. Couples enjoyed the shade of the ancient trees, while groups of friends spread colorful blankets on the grass for spontaneous picnics. The aroma of popcorn wafted through the air, bringing back childhood memories for every adult present. Emily had chosen that time deliberately. Sunday mornings in Central Park had a magical quality. They were less crowded than the afternoons, allowing her and Lily to enjoy moments of peace away from the hustle and bustle of the week. Since becoming a single mother, these outings represented small refuges of tranquility amidst the constant responsibilities of caring for a baby almost alone. It was in that moment of serenity that both their worlds were turned upside down. Ethan, who had been happily playing on the merry-go-round with other kids, casually lifted his eyes in Emily's direction. Something inexplicable happened in that instant, as if a light had turned on in his small chest. Without warning, without hesitation, without any logical explanation, the boy jumped off the ride and ran toward the stranger. "Mommy! Mommy!" Ethan shouted with all the strength of his little lungs, his voice echoing throughout the park and turning several heads in the direction of the sound. His little feet pounded against the ground with determination, his arms outstretched as if running toward the most familiar embrace in the world. David felt the blood run cold in his veins. For a second that felt like an eternity, he was paralyzed by shock, watching his son run toward a complete stranger with an intimacy that left him utterly perplexed. Then his protective instinct kicked in, and he sprinted after the boy, his heart racing in his chest. "Ethan, Ethan, come back!" David shouted, his voice filled with panic and confusion. People around began to look, some with curiosity, others with concern. An elderly woman sipping lemonade at a nearby stall whispered to her friend, "How strange, right? A child doesn't do that without a reason." Emily, who until then had been walking calmly, pushing the stroller, stopped abruptly upon hearing the shouts. Her eyes widened in surprise as she saw the boy running toward her with outstretched arms, calling her mommy, with a conviction that left her completely speechless. When Ethan finally reached her, something still, the most surprising thing happened. Without any shyness or hesitation typical of children in front of strangers, he threw himself against Clara's legs, embracing her with a force and familiarity that made time stop around them. His small hands clutched her jeans as if he were reuniting with someone he had lost a long time ago. "Mommy, you're back. I knew you would come back," murmured Ethan against Clara's leg, his little voice muffled by emotion. Tears began to stream down his rosy cheeks, but they were tears of pure joy, as if a void in his heart had finally been filled. Clara stood completely still, her hands trembling slightly as she looked down at the unfamiliar boy who hugged her as if she were the most important person in the world. A strange sensation took over her chest, a mix of tenderness, confusion, and something she couldn't name. But that made her heart race inexplicably. David arrived seconds later, breathless and visibly disturbed. His hands trembled as he gently held his son's shoulders, trying to pull him away from the unknown woman. "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, Mom," said David, his voice choked by heavy breathing. "I don't know what got into him. He's never done this before, I swear that." He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes met Clara's for the first time. There was something in that moment, a silent recognition that neither of them could explain. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine as she looked into David's almond-shaped eyes, as if she were seeing a familiar face in a nearly forgotten dream. He, in turn, was momentarily speechless, lost in the softness of her gaze. "No, you don't need to apologize," Clara finally murmured, her voice soft but clearly shaken. He is very affectionate." Her hands instinctively reached toward Ethan's curls, as if she wanted to comfort him, but she stopped mid-motion, aware that she didn't have that right. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft cries of baby Lily, who had woken up from the commotion. Clara diverted her gaze from David's troubled face and leaned over the stroller, her experienced hands adjusting the pink blanket while murmuring sweet words to calm her daughter. The gentle scent of baby soap mingled with the aroma of the flowers in the park, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere amid the emotional chaos that had settled. "Shh, my love, Mommy is here," Clara whispered to Lily, her voice carrying that maternal melody that only mothers know. But her eyes kept drifting back to Ethan, who still clung to her leg with an intensity that left her deeply unsettled. David was trying to process what was happening, his hands still resting on his son's small shoulders. Ethan seemed to have found exactly what he was looking for, and the satisfaction on his little face was undeniable. The boy looked at Clara as if she were the answer to all his prayers, his dark eyes shining with a happiness that David hadn't seen in a long time. "Ethan, buddy, come here," David said gently, his voice laden with forced patience. "The lady isn't your mommy, you're getting confused." The words came out of his mouth, but he himself couldn't understand his son's reaction. Ethan was a shy child who normally hid behind his father's legs when he met strangers. "I'm not confused, Daddy," protested Ethan, his little voice taking on a tone of stubbornness that David knew well. "She is my mommy, I know it. She smells like mommy." The boy pressed his face against Clara's leg again, inhaling deeply like a puppy trying to identify a familiar scent. Clara felt her legs weaken. The child's assertion about her smell hit her like a punch in the stomach, awakening fragmented memories she had buried years ago. Her hands trembled imperceptibly as she continued to rock Lily, who had stopped crying and was now watching everything with her curious blue eyes. "Look, I'm really sorry about this," David murmured, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of nervousness that had become habitual over the last 2 years. He lost his mother when he was very young, and sometimes... He stopped again, realizing he was sharing personal information with a complete stranger. But there was something about her that made him feel as if he already knew her from somewhere. "She didn't die, Daddy," Ethan interrupted with the brutal honesty of children. "Mommy just left, but I knew she would come back. And look," he pointed at Clara with a radiant smile. "She came back different, but it's her." The boy's comment created an awkward silence. David felt his face heat with embarrassment, while Clara bit her lower lip, clearly touched by the situation. Around them, other families continued their Sunday activities, but it was impossible to ignore the curious glances they received. "Your name is Ethan?" Clara asked softly, bending down to be at the boy's level. Something in her voice had changed, a sweetness almost maternal that made David's heart tighten inexplicably. "Yes, Ethan Johnson," the boy replied proudly, extending his little hand as he had learned in school. "And this is my daddy, David. He is the best daddy in the world, but he gets sad sometimes when he thinks about mommy." David closed his eyes for a moment, mortified by his son's sincerity. When he opened them again, he found Clara's understanding gaze, and for an instant he forgot how to breathe. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ethan," Clara said, squeezing his little hand with a gentleness that brought inexplicable tears to her eyes. "My name is Clara, and this here is my daughter, Lily." She pointed to the baby, who was watching Ethan with growing interest. "Lily!" exclaimed Ethan, as if the name were magical. "Can I see her up close?" Without waiting for a response, he let go of Clara and approached the stroller. Emily's eyes widened in admiration as she looked at the baby girl. "She's so tiny. Is she my little sister?" The innocent question struck both David and Emily like a bolt of lightning. They exchanged glances over Ethan's head, both visibly shaken by the naturalness with which the child had made the association. "Ethan, no," David began, but was interrupted by something even more surprising. Lily, who had been quietly sitting in the stroller until then, stretched her tiny arms toward Ethan and let out a joyful coo, as if she recognized the boy. Her blue eyes locked onto his, face with an unusual intensity for a baby her age. "Wow, she likes me," Ethan exclaimed, amazed. "Can I hold her, please?" Emily froze. Lily was a baby who usually cried around strangers, but her reaction to Ethan was completely the opposite. The child seemed to have a calming effect on her daughter, something Emily had never observed before. "She's still very small," Emily murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. Something deep in her maternal instinct was screaming that this was right, that Ethan and Lily somehow knew each other. David watched the scene with growing discomfort. The whole situation felt too surreal, and his naturally suspicious nature began to manifest. As a single father, he had developed a natural paranoia about strangers approaching his child, especially after all the warnings about kidnappings and dangerous situations he constantly heard. "Look, it's better if we head out," David finally said, his voice harsher than he intended. "Ethan, let's go. The lady has things to do." He reached out his hand to his son, but Ethan didn't move. "I don't want to go, Daddy," the boy said, his voice starting to tremble. "I want to stay with Mommy and Lily." Tears began to form in his eyes, and Emily felt her heart shatter. "Son, she's not your mommy," David repeated, trying to maintain patience but failing. "Stop saying that." "She is!" Ethan shouted, surprising everyone with the intensity of his reaction. "I know she is! I dream about her every night." The boy began to cry heavily, his sobs echoing through the park and attracting even more attention. Emily felt tears welling up in her own eyes. The pain in Ethan's voice was too real, too intense to be just a childish confusion. Her maternal instinct screamed to comfort him, to pick him up and tell him everything would be okay. "David," she said softly, using his name for the first time. "Maybe it's best to let him calm down first before—" She stopped when she realized she had called Ethan's father by name. Even though he hadn't introduced himself, David looked at her with renewed suspicion. "How do you know my name?" Emily went pale, realizing her mistake. Your son said that—" "No, he didn't say my name," David interrupted, his voice taking on an accusatory tone. "He said I was his daddy, but he never mentioned my name." His eyes narrowed as he studied her. "Who are you?" The atmosphere in the park seemed to have completely changed. What had started as an inexplicable but touching encounter was turning into something tense and laden with distrust. Emily held tightly to the stroller's handle, her fingers white from the strength. "I don't know why I said your name," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was instinctive. I swear I don't know where it came from." Ethan continued to cry, now clinging to Emily's leg again, as if sensing that his newly found family was about to disappear. Lily, influenced by the boy's crying, began to cry as well, creating a cacophony of child suffering that made several passers-by stop to watch. "This is very strange," David murmured, more to himself than to Emily. "Very strange indeed." He bent down and firmly picked Ethan up, ignoring the boy's protests. "Let's go, Ethan, now." "No, I don't want to!" Ethan screamed, reaching out his arms toward Emily as his father carried him away. "Mommy! Mommy, don't let him take me!" Emily stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she watched the boy being taken away. Every shout of "Mommy" from his small mouth felt like a stab to her heart. Her hands trembled as she cradled Lily, who was also crying inconsolably. David walked quickly toward the parking lot, Ethan struggling in his arms and shouting for Emily. The people around looked on with a mix of pity and judgment, some murmuring comments about parents who couldn't control their children. When they finally reached the car, David mechanically placed Ethan in the car seat, his own hands trembling slightly. The boy had stopped screaming, but silent tears still rolled down his rosy cheeks. "Daddy," Ethan murmured, his voice hoarse from crying. "Why didn't you let me stay with Mommy?" David closed his eyes and rested his forehead on the steering wheel before answering. "Because she's not your mommy, son. Your mommy. Your mommy left, remember? And that woman is a stranger." "She's not a stranger," Ethan insisted, his voice small but determined. "She smells like Mommy, and Lily is my little sister. I know she is." As he drove toward his apartment in Brooklyn, David couldn't shake the image of Emily's face when Ethan called her Mommy. There was something in those brown eyes that disturbed him deeply. A familiarity he couldn't explain, but that made his stomach churn with anxiety. On the other side of the park, Emily remained frozen in place, watching the car disappear into the Sunday traffic of New York City. Lily had calmed down in her arms, but her own eyes were still wet with tears she couldn't control. For the first time in years, Emily Smith felt that a part of her had just been forcefully ripped away. The days that followed. They made their way to the park, passing like a dense and disturbing fog for David. Sitting at his desk in the engineering office in the financial district, he tried to focus on the structural calculations for a residential building project. But his mind kept drifting back to those brown eyes and the soft voice of the woman his son had called Mommy. The constant noise of construction outside, with its jackhammers and trucks, usually helped him concentrate, but today it only intensified his headache. "David, are you okay?" asked Marcos, his partner of 10 years, watching him from the next desk. He was a sturdy 40-year-old man with greying beard and thick glasses, who knew David well, enough to notice when something was bothering him. "You look like you've seen a ghost, man." David lifted his eyes from the architectural plans scattered across his desk, realizing he had spent the last 20 minutes staring at the same spot without really seeing anything. "It's just fatigue, Marcos. Ethan hasn't been sleeping well lately." It was true. Since Sunday, Ethan had been having nightmares almost every night, something that hadn't happened in months. But this time, it was different. Instead of bad dreams about monsters or darkness that used to disturb him, the boy would wake up crying and asking for the brown-haired mommy. David had tried repeatedly to explain that the woman was a stranger, but Ethan seemed convinced he recognized her. The night before, David had found his son drawing at the kitchen table of their duplex apartment in Brooklyn. The yellow light from the chandelier revealed sheets of paper scattered around, all with the same repetitive drawing. A female figure with long hair, always next to a smaller figure, clearly a baby. The drawings had that simple yet revealing quality typical of children, and they were astonishingly detailed for a 4-year-old boy. "Who is this? Ethan?" David had asked, pointing to the female figure. "It's Mommy," Ethan replied casually, without looking up from the paper. "And this is Lily, my little sister." The knot in David's stomach tightened even more. "Son, how many times do I have to tell you that woman is not your mommy? Your mommy was different, remember? She had blonde hair and—" "No," Ethan interrupted him with unsettling firmness. "That wasn't my real mommy. This is." He pointed to the drawing with the blue crayon he was holding. "I always knew she would come back." Now, sitting in his air-conditioned office, while New York City buzzed outside under the strong March sun, David wondered if he should seek psychological help for his son. Perhaps that episode in the park had triggered some kind of elaborate fantasy in the child's mind, a way to cope with the maternal abandonment he had suffered at such a young age. His cell phone vibrated on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. A message from Ethan's school. "Mr. David, I would like to speak with you about Ethan's behavior this week. Could you stop by when you come to pick him up? Sincerely, Ms. Johnson." David sighed deeply and put the phone in his pocket. More problems. Since Monday, according to the teacher, Ethan had become distracted and restless during class, constantly asking if the brown-haired mommy would come to pick him up from school. On the other side of the city, in Brooklyn, Emily was having her own internal battle. Sitting in the teacher's lounge of Little Steps Elementary School, where she had taught for 8 years, she tried to grade her second-grade students' math assignments, but her hands trembled slightly with each page turned. The familiar smell of chalk and school supplies that usually calmed her only intensified her anxiety today. "Emily, you look pale. commented Fernanda, a colleague who shared the grading table with her. She was an energetic 45-year-old woman with curly hair, always willing to help. "Is something wrong with Lily? You've seemed worried since Monday." Emily hesitated before answering. How could she explain what had happened in the park? How could she say that an unknown boy had called her mommy with such conviction that she still felt the echo of that little voice in her mind? "It's just fatigue," Emily murmured, forcing a smile. "Lily hasn't been sleeping well at night." It was a lie. Lily was sleeping perfectly well, in fact better than ever. It was Emily who spent the nights awake, mentally replaying every second of that strange encounter. There was something about that boy that had touched her deeply, the way he had run to her as if he were coming home after a long journey, the way his little eyes had sparkled when he saw her, and especially Lily's reaction, her daughter, who usually cried near strangers, had calmed instantly in Ethan's presence. Throughout the week, Emily had found herself deviating from her usual route to work, passing by Central Park in hopes of seeing the father and son again. But the park was always filled with different families, and she never spotted them. The feeling of loss she experienced was disproportionate for someone who had known those people for only a few minutes. "Emily," said Fernanda, gently touching her arm, "can I ask you something personal?" Emily lifted her eyes from the notebooks, realizing she had marked the same question 3 times. "Sure." "Have you ever thought about reaching out to Lily's father? I mean, I know you two ended on bad terms, but sometimes people change, and a child needs a father figure." "No," Emily replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "It's complicated, Fernanda, very complicated." She returned to looking at the notebooks, signaling that she didn't want to continue the subject, but her friend's question had touched a sensitive nerve. Emily rarely spoke about Lily's father, even to her closest colleagues. The truth was that she herself wasn't even sure who he was. Emily sat in her classroom, reflecting on her past, not because she had been in several relationships, but because her memory of that time was fragmented, filled with gaps she preferred not to explore. There was a time, about 5 years ago, when her life had been turned upside down. She vaguely remembered working as a nanny for a family, falling in love, and going through traumatic situations that led her to change cities and almost completely reinvent herself. But the details were hazy, as if her mind had deliberately erased parts of that experience to protect her. The sound of the bell announcing the end of recess brought her back to the present. Her students began to enter the classroom, their high-pitched voices and contagious energy filling the air. But when Lucas, a boy with brown hair and dark eyes similar to Ethan's, ran to hug her as he did every day, Emily felt her heart race. "Aunt Emily!" shouted Lucas, throwing himself into her arms. "Look what I brought for you!" It was a drawing, a house with a family in front of it. A father, a mother, and 2 children. Emily looked at the paper and felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. It was almost identical to the drawing she imagined Ethan might make. "Very nice, Lucas," she managed to say, her voice slightly trembling. "Who are these people?" "That's me, my little sister who's going to be born, my daddy and my mommy," the boy replied proudly. "Daddy said that when my sister is born, we will be a complete family." Lucas's innocent comment painfully reminded Emily of how Ethan had looked at Lily, as if recognizing a little sister. There was a naturalness to that reaction that continued to disturb her. Throughout the afternoon, while teaching fractions using colorful blocks and helping her students with addition problems, part of Emily's mind was elsewhere. She found herself imagining what it would be like to meet Ethan again, what it would be like to talk to David without the tension and suspicion that had marked their first encounter. When the last student left the classroom at 5:30 p.m., Emily methodically packed her things and went to pick up Lily from the school daycare. The baby was radiant, happily cooing in the caregiver's arms. She was very good today. Ms. Johnson, a caring 60-year-old woman who looked after the staff's babies, commented. But there was something funny. What? Emily asked, picking Lily up. She got very excited when a boy passed by in the hallway this morning. A little boy who came with his mum to take care of something in the office. She kept stretching her arms towards him and crying when he left. I've never seen her react like that to a strange child. Emily felt her blood run cold. What did this boy look like? Brown hair, dark little eyes, about 4 years old. Why, do you know him? No, Emily lied, but her heart was racing. Just curious. As she walked toward the bus stop on Cursino Avenue, Emily tried to process what she had just heard. The possibility that Ethan had been at Lily's school on the same day seemed like too much of a coincidence. Did he live around there? Did David live in the area? Throughout the bus ride to her apartment in Brooklyn, with Lily sleeping peacefully in her lap, Emily found herself observing the streets, the people, the children, unconsciously searching for a father and son who had turned her world upside down with just a few minutes of interaction. When she finally arrived home, a small but cozy 2-bedroom apartment she shared with Lily, Emily placed her daughter in the crib and headed to her bedroom. She opened the wardrobe and, from the back of the last drawer, pulled out a dusty shoebox. Inside the box were photographs, documents, and mementos from a time she had tried to forget. Her hands trembled as she found a specific photo. Herself, about 5 years younger, smiling next to a blonde woman she couldn't fully identify, but who brought her a familiar yet uncomfortable feeling. On the back of the photo, a note in her own handwriting. With Mari, last happy day. Emily turned the photo back over, studying her own youthful face in the image. There was something in her eyes at that time that she no longer recognized. An innocence, a joy that had disappeared at some point in the following years. Who was Mari, and why had that day been marked as the last happy day? For the first time in years, Emily felt an urgent need to recover the memories she had buried so deeply. Something told her that the answers to the questions Ethan had awakened in her mind were connected to that hazy time in her life. While Lily slept peacefully in the next room, Emily spent the entire night sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by old photographs and fragments of memories that refused to connect into a coherent story. But one thing she knew for sure: her life had changed the moment she heard a 4-year-old boy shout, "Mommy!" running toward her. And somehow she felt that this change was just beginning. Monday arrived shrouded in the typical autumn fog of New York City, enveloping the city in a grey atmosphere that perfectly mirrored David's state of mind. After a restless night, where Ethan had woken up 3 times crying and calling for his brown-haired mommy, he decided to leave for work earlier, making a strategic stop at Mr. Baker's Bakery on the corner of Harmony Street and Murato Coelho Street, in the heart of Brooklyn. The bakery was one of those traditional establishments that bravely resisted the gentrification of the neighborhood. With its blue and white tiled walls, faded red formica counters, and the unmistakable aroma of warm French bread mixed with freshly brewed coffee, the place represented, in the midst of modern bars and art galleries that had taken over the area, Mr. Baker, a 65-year-old Portuguese man with a grey moustache and an apron always stained with flour, had known David for 2 years, ever since he moved into the duplex apartment 2 blocks away. He was a man of few words but observant, knowing exactly what each regular customer preferred without needing to ask. "Good morning, David," Mr. Baker said, already preparing the coffee and setting aside 4 still warm French rolls. "How's the boy? He hasn't been coming to get bread with me on Sundays lately." David forced a smile while watching the morning bustle of the bakery. Businessmen in suits quickly sipped coffee at the counter before heading to work, while neighborhood ladies carefully selected pastries for their afternoon tea. The sound of conversations blended with the noise of the espresso machine and the clinking of spoons in glass cups. "He's been a bit odd," David admitted, accepting the steaming coffee. He developed some strange habits after a trip to the park last Sunday. "Kids are like that," commented Ms. White, a white-haired lady who had been frequenting the bakery for over 20 years. She was sitting at one of the small round tables near the counter with a half-finished latte and a toasted roll. "My grandson also went through a phase of making friends with strange people on the street. The psychologist said it's normal." David nodded distractedly, but his attention was diverted when the bakery door opened with the typical chime of the golden bell. A woman entered pushing a stroller, and David's heart nearly stopped when he recognized the wavy brown hair and delicate profile. It was Emily. She looked more tired than the previous Sunday, with slight dark circles under her brown eyes, but still maintained that natural elegance that had impressed him at the park. She wore a navy blue blouse and a beige midi skirt with comfortable flats, the typical uniform of a teacher who spent the day on her feet. Lily was peacefully sleeping in the stroller, covered by a yellow blanket with duck patterns. Emily stopped abruptly at the entrance when her eyes met David's. For a moment they were frozen, like two people unexpectedly meeting in a place they shouldn't be. The chatter of the bakery seemed to fade around them, creating a bubble of silence charged with tension. "Good morning," Emily finally murmured, her voice barely audible above the morning noise. "Good morning," David replied, feeling his throat go dry suddenly. He noticed her hands trembling slightly as she held the stroller's handle. Mr. Baker, oblivious to the tension in the air, greeted Emily with his usual warmth. "Hello, dear. How's our favorite teacher today? And little Lily?" David felt an electric shock run down his spine. Mr. Baker knew Emily. This meant she was a regular customer, living nearby, frequenting the same places as him. The coincidence was too disturbing to be mere chance. "I'm fine, Mr. Baker," Emily replied, forcing a smile as she approached the counter. She carefully avoided looking in David's direction. "The usual, please." "Of course, a latte, 2 sugar rolls, and that carrot cake." "You like," the baker said, already moving to prepare the order. "And how's work at school? Are the kids behaving?" "Always an adventure," Emily replied, trying to keep the tone casual. But David noticed she seemed nervous, her fingers drumming unconsciously on the Formica counter. It was then that Lily woke up with a soft whimper. Emily immediately leaned over the stroller to calm her daughter, but to her surprise, the baby stopped crying the moment her blue eyes fixed on David. A spontaneous smile lit up her little face, and she reached her arms out toward him. "How strange," commented Miss White, who had been watching the scene with interest. "Babies that age usually fear strangers. She seems to know you, young man." David felt his mouth go dry. Lily's reaction was almost identical to Ethan's at the park, that inexplicable familiarity that made him question his own sanity. "Yeah, it is strange," David murmured, avoiding looking directly at Emily. But he could feel her eyes fixed on his face, studying each of his reactions. "Do you two know each other?" Mr. Baker asked innocently, handing the latte to Emily. "Because Lily is reacting as if you're her dad." Baker's casual comment created an awkward silence. Emily visibly paled, while David felt his heart race in his chest. Ms. White observed everything with the typical curiosity of neighborhood ladies who lived for small, everyday dramas. "We met once," Emily finally said, her voice weak. "At the park, by chance." "Oh, what a coincidence," exclaimed Mr. Baker. "New York is a big city, but neighborhoods are still small. These chance encounters always happen." David grabbed his bag of rolls and left the money on the counter, eager to escape the situation. But as he turned to leave, he heard Emily whisper, "David, can we talk?" He paused with his hand on the door, internally debating whether to ignore her and keep walking. All his rationality screamed to run from this woman who had turned his son's life upside down. But something in her voice, a vulnerability that echoed his own confusion, made him hesitate. "About what?" he asked without fully turning around. "About what happened at the park. About why I knew your name." Emily had stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance, but David could smell the soft scent of her shampoo, something floral that brought a disturbing familiarity. David finally turned to face her. Emily's brown eyes were moist, and there was a sincerity. Emily took a deep breath, her expression disarming him completely. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But since Sunday, I can't stop thinking about your son. The way he called me, the way he reacted when he saw me." She paused, glancing quickly at Lily, who continued reaching out her little arms towards David. "And the way my daughter is reacting to you now." David observed Lily for a moment. The baby was staring at him with her bright blue eyes, gurgling happily, as if trying to communicate with him. It was impossible to deny that there was something strange about that reaction. "Your son," Emily continued hesitantly, "does he have nightmares or strange dreams?" The question hit David like a punch. "How do you know that?" "Because I do too," Emily admitted, her words coming out in a whisper. "For years. Dreams about a child I don't know, but who calls me Mommy. And since Sunday, those dreams have become more vivid." David felt his legs weaken. The bakery around them continued its normal rhythm. Mr. Baker, preparing coffees, Ms. White flipping through her newspaper, other customers chatting about trivialities. But for him, the world had stopped. "That's impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to Emily. "I know it sounds crazy," Emily said quickly, as if fearing he would leave before she could explain. "But there's more. I found some things at home, old photos, and I think we might have known each other before. A long time ago." David stared at her with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all as the fantasy of a woman who had been struck by Ethan's reaction, but another, deeper and instinctive part recognized that there was something familiar about her from the first moment he saw her. "What kind of photos?" he asked cautiously. Emily hesitated, looking around the bakery to make sure no one was listening to their conversation. "Photos from when I worked as a nanny a few years ago. I don't remember much from that time. It was a difficult period in my life, and I think I blocked some memories, but there's one photo where a woman might be—" She stopped nervously, biting her lower lip. "Might be what?" David pressed. "Ethan's mother," Emily whispered, the words coming out with difficulty. "The woman in the photo is blonde, just like you said his mother was, and I have a feeling I knew her well." David was left speechless. The possibility that Emily had known Sarah was something he had never considered. Sarah had disappeared so completely from their lives that sometimes he wondered if she had really existed, or if she had just been a dream from which he had awakened to find himself a single father to a small boy. "Look," David finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to go to work now, but maybe we can talk later, when I pick up Ethan from school." Emily nodded quickly. "What school does he attend?" "Little Explorers Academy, on Aspicuelta Street," David replied, immediately regretting having given that information, but it was too late. "I pass by there every day on my way to my school," Emily said, a glimmer of hope shining in her eyes. Maybe we can meet there tomorrow, after classes." David hesitated. Every fibre of his paternal being screamed against involving a stranger in his son's life. But Ethan's dreams, Lily's inexplicable reactions, and especially the disturbing feeling that he knew Emily from somewhere, made him nod reluctantly. 5:30, he said, at the school entrance. Thank you, Emily whispered, and David could swear he saw tears forming in her eyes. I need to understand what's happening. For Ethan, for Lily, for all of us. David nodded and left the bakery, his heart racing as he walked through the familiar streets of Brooklyn towards work. The grey sky perfectly mirrored his internal confusion, and he wondered if he had just made the wisest, or most dangerous decision of his life. Behind him, in the bakery, Emily stood for a few minutes watching Lily, who had started to cry softly again as soon as David was out of sight. Ms. White approached with barely concealed curiosity. "Nice guy, isn't he, dear?" the lady commented with a mischievous smile. "And he seems to be a good father. A single man with a small child always awakens the maternal instinct in women." Emily forced a smile, but her mind was far from the lady's romantic insinuations. She was thinking about the photos in her memory box, the dreams that had haunted her for years, and the growing feeling that her life was about to change irreversibly. As she pushed the stroller with Lily through the neighborhood streets towards the bus stop, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the expression on David's face when she mentioned the possibility of having known Ethan's mother. There was pain there, but also a desperate curiosity that mirrored exactly what she was feeling. Tomorrow, she thought, watching the flowering trees beginning to take on autumn hues, tomorrow might finally start to bring the answers she had been searching for so long. Tuesday dawned with a clear blue sky that dramatically contrasted with the fog of tension that had hung over David since he woke up. Sitting at the kitchen table in his apartment, he watched Ethan play distractedly with his breakfast cereal, pushing the colorful flakes from one side of the bowl to the other without actually eating. The golden morning light streamed through the window overlooking the small courtyard of the building, illuminating the still sleepy face of the boy. "Dad," Ethan suddenly said, lifting his dark eyes to meet David's gaze. "Are you going to meet the brown-haired mommy today?" David almost choked on his coffee. Emily had been careful not to mention anything about Ethan or the meeting scheduled for that afternoon, but David seemed to have developed a sixth sense for these things. "Why are you asking that, son?" David tried to keep his voice casual while observing the expressions that alternated on Ethan's little face. "Because I dreamed about her again," Ethan replied naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She was sad and wanted to see Lily, and there was a very angry man who wouldn't let her come near us. A chill ran down David's spine. Ethan's dreams were becoming increasingly elaborate and specific, details that a 4-year-old child wouldn't normally invent on their own. "And what else did you dream?" David asked, trying to sound uninterested while internally battling a growing sense of unease. Ethan tilted his head, as if accessing distant memories. "There was a big house with a garden full of yellow flowers. The mommy with brown hair lived there and took care of me when I was really little. She sang a song about a little bird that flew far from home but always came back." The boy began to hum a soft and melancholic melody that David had never heard before. His hands trembled imperceptibly as he placed the coffee cup on the table. Ethan's description was too detailed, too specific to be mere childhood imagination, and there was something in the melody that the boy hummed that awakened distant echoes in his own memory. "Ethan, are you sure that was a dream?" David asked, crouching down to his son's level. "Isn't it a story you saw on TV or that someone told you?" "It's not a dream, Daddy," Ethan replied with that disarming frankness of children. "They are memories. Miss Johnson said at school that we can have memories from when we were babies, even if we don't know they are memories." David felt his heart race. Was Ethan's school working on memory concepts with the children? Or was this yet another inexplicable coincidence in the series of strange events that had begun the previous Sunday? On the other side of the city, Emily was having the longest and most productive morning she had had in months. She woke up at 5 in the morning with a sense of urgency that made her completely rummage through the box of memories she had found the night before. Spread out on the kitchen table of her apartment in Brooklyn were yellowed photographs, old documents, postcards, and small objects she had kept, without knowing exactly why. Lily was sleeping peacefully in her baby comforter on the living room sofa, surrounded by the first rays of sunlight coming through the window. The apartment, small but cozy, with its white walls decorated with drawings from her students and photographs of happy moments with her daughter, had turned into a personal archaeology lab. Emily held a specific photograph with trembling hands. In the image, she appeared about 5 years younger, smiling radiantly next to a blonde woman with green eyes who was holding a small baby. In the background of the photo, part of a large house with a garden full of yellow flowers could be seen, exactly as Ethan had described in his dreams, although Emily had no way of knowing that. On the back of the photo, in her own handwriting, it was written, "With Mary and baby Ethan. Last day before everything changed." Ethan. The name was there, in her own handwriting, like a revelation that struck her like lightning. Her hands trembled so much that she almost dropped the photograph. How was it possible that she had a photo with the same boy who had called her Mommy in the park? How was it possible that she knew his name 5 years before, supposedly meeting him for the first time? Emily ran to her bedroom and grabbed her cell phone, immediately calling her older sister Beatrice, who lived in San Francisco. She was the only person who might have information about that foggy period of her life, although they rarely talked about it. "Emily? What time is it?" Beatrice's sleepy voice echoed through the phone. "Bea, I need you to tell me about that time when I worked as a nanny," Emily said without preamble. 5 years ago. Do you remember the family I worked for?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Emily could hear her sister moving around, probably sitting up in bed and trying to wake up completely. "Emily, why are you digging into this again?" Beatrice's voice was now alert, laden with a concern that Emily knew well. "You said you wanted to forget all that." "Because I think I found them," Emily said quickly. "The child I took care of, Ethan. He recognized me, Bea. Called me Mommy as if—" "Emily, stop!" Beatrice's interruption was firm. "You can't be serious. That family, after everything that happened, you can't want to get involved with them again." "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice becoming desperate. "Why don't I remember? Why is everything from that period so confusing in my mind?" Beatrice sighed deeply. Emily could imagine her sister running her hand through her hair, a gesture she made when she was nervous. "Do you remember the accident?" Beatrice asked gently. "What accident?" Emily felt her stomach clench. "Emily, you hit your head when you left their house. It was a terrible night. You came here to San Francisco crying, confused, with a bruise on your forehead. The doctor said you had a mild concussion, and that could affect your memories from that period." Emily fell silent, trying to process the information. Fragments of memories began to emerge like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. A heated argument, shouting, someone saying she could never see Ethan again, a door slamming. With strength. "And the child's mother?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah," Beatrice said hesitantly. "She was complicated, Clara. You never told me all the details, but I know you were close at first. You loved that child as if he were your own. But something went wrong, and when you tried to interfere in the family dynamic, things got ugly." Clara closed her eyes, trying to force the memories to return. There was something on the edge of her consciousness, a deep sense of loss that she had carried for years without fully understanding where it came from. "Bea, do you have the address of that family or their full name?" "Clara, no." Beatrice's voice became firm again. "Promise me you won't look for those people. You've built a new life. You have Lily now. It's not worth reopening old wounds." But Clara had already hung up the phone, her mind racing in 1,000 different directions. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture that emerged was more confusing and disturbing than she had imagined. She returned to the kitchen table and examined the other photographs with new eyes. In several of them, she appeared with Ethan at different ages, from newborn to about 2 years old. There were pictures of him sleeping in her arms, her giving him a bottle, the two of them playing in the same flower-filled garden that appeared in the first photograph. In one of the most touching images, Clara was sitting on the garden floor with Ethan in her lap, both looking at something outside the frame. The expression on her face was one of pure maternal love, and Ethan looked completely relaxed and happy in her arms. On the back, just a date, Ethan 18 months. Our last spontaneous picnic. Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. How had she completely forgotten such a significant part of her life? How was it possible to erase 2 years of close companionship with a child she had clearly loved like a son? As Lily began to wake up with small noises on the sofa, Clara picked up her phone again and dialed a number she had saved in her contacts but never used. The one for a neuropsychiatrist that a friend had recommended years ago when she started having memory problems. "Dr. Fernando Ribeiro's office," a secretary answered. "I would like to schedule an urgent appointment," Clara said. "It's about traumatic memory loss. We have an opening for tomorrow at 2 p.m. if it's really urgent." "Perfect," Clara replied, noting the time. "I'll be there." After hanging up, she sat in silence for a few minutes, looking at the photographs spread out before her. There were so many unanswered questions, so many pieces of the puzzle still missing. But one thing was becoming clear. Her encounter with Ethan in the park had not been a coincidence. It was a reunion. The rest of the morning passed in careful preparation. Clara organized all the photographs in chronological order, prepared a list of questions to ask Dr. Ribeiro, and most importantly, emotionally prepared herself for the meeting with David that afternoon. At 3 p.m., she was at Lily's school, making arrangements to leave early. Fernanda watched her with curiosity as she quickly packed her things. "Do you have a medical appointment?" her colleague asked. "I can cover your classes if you need." "It's something personal," Clara replied, avoiding going into details. "But thank you for the offer." As she walked through the streets of Brooklyn toward the bus stop, pushing Lily's stroller, Clara felt a mix of anxiety and determination that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The photographs were carefully organized in her bag, ready to be shown to David. She didn't know how he would react to discovering that she had been part of Ethan's life for 2 whole years, but she knew it was time for the truth. The bus was more crowded than usual, forcing Clara to stand throughout the journey to Brooklyn. Lily slept peacefully in the stroller, gently swaying with the movement of the vehicle. Clara took the time to mentally review everything she had discovered that morning, preparing for a conversation that could change all their lives forever. When she finally arrived at Aspicuelta Street at 5:15 p.m., Clara saw David waiting at the door of Little Explorers Academy. He was leaning against the school wall, nervously looking at the watch on his wrist. As he saw her approaching, he straightened up, and Clara could sense the tension in his shoulders. "You came," he said when she got close enough to hear him. "I said I would," Clara replied, stopping the stroller beside him. "And you? Where's Ethan?" "I left him with my neighbor," David explained. "I thought it would be better for us to talk alone first." He paused, studying Clara's face. "You look different today, more determined." Clara took a deep breath. It's because I've discovered some things. About us. About Ethan. She opened her bag and pulled out the envelope with the photographs. David, I think you need to see this. David looked at the envelope in Clara's hands with a mix of curiosity and apprehension that made his stomach tighten. Aspicuelta Street was bustling with parents picking up their children from various schools in the area, the noise of cars and conversations creating an urban soundtrack that contrasted with the silent tension between the two of them. Maybe it's better if we go somewhere more private, David suggested, looking around. There's a park right ahead with benches in the shade. Clara nodded, and they walked in silence for 2 blocks until they reached Central Park. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon in Brooklyn. Young mothers pushing strollers, children playing on the playground equipment while nannies chatted on the benches, and retirees playing dominoes under the century-old trees that provided generous shade from the still strong March sun. They found a secluded bench near a grassy area away from the main flow of the park. David. He sat a respectful distance from Emily, but close enough to see what she had to show. Lily was awake in the stroller, observing everything with her curious blue eyes, emitting small gurgles that broke the tense silence. Before you see these photos, Emily began, her hands trembling slightly as she held the envelope. I need to tell you what I discovered today. I spoke with my sister this morning, and she told me some things that explain why my memory of that time is so fragmented. David leaned slightly in her direction, all his senses heightened. What time? 5 years ago, Emily said, her voice taking on an almost whispering tone. When I was working as a nanny for a family here in Brooklyn. According to my sister, I suffered some kind of accident that affected my memory, and that's why I don't clearly remember what happened. David's heart began to race. 5 years ago was exactly when Sarah had disappeared from their lives. He vaguely remembered Sarah mentioning a nanny that Ethan liked very much, but the details were confused in his mind, obscured by the trauma of abandonment and the overwhelming responsibilities of becoming a single father overnight. A nanny, David repeated slowly. For which family? Emily took a deep breath and opened the envelope, pulling out the first photograph. With trembling hands, she handed it to David. For your family. David took the photo and felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The image showed Emily, visibly younger, smiling radiantly while holding a 2-year-old Ethan in her arms. They were in the garden of her old house in Brooklyn, the same house where he had lived with Sarah before everything fell apart. In the background of the image, he could see the same yellow flowers that Sarah loved so much, the same ones she had planted when she found out she was pregnant. My God, David murmured, his voice almost inaudible. This is impossible. There's more, Emily said gently, watching the pallor take over David's face. She pulled out another photo, this one showing Emily feeding Ethan while sitting in the same nursing chair that David remembered Sarah using in the early months. David took the second photo with visibly trembling hands now. Long-buried memories began to emerge like fragments of a half-forgotten dream. He remembered Sarah mentioning Emily constantly, talking about how the nanny was wonderful with Ethan, how the boy adored her, how she seemed to understand the child's needs better than anyone else. You were Ethan's nanny, David said, not as a question but as a realization he was trying to process. You took care of him when he was little. For 2 years, Emily confirmed, her voice heavy with emotion. From what I can see in these photos, I practically raised him from newborn to 2 years old. She pulled out more photographs from the envelope, creating a visual mosaic of Ethan's childhood that David had almost completely forgotten. There were pictures of Emily bathing Ethan, reading stories to him, playing in the garden, teaching him to take his first steps. In all the images, both Emily and Ethan looked completely at ease with each other, as if they were truly mother and son. "Where is Sarah in these photos?" David asked, noticing that his ex-partner appeared in only a few images, always more distant, less involved with the child. Emily hesitated before responding. "According to my sister, Sarah and I were close at first, but something happened, something that made me have to leave your house in a traumatic way." David looked at Emily with new understanding. Now he vaguely remembered a terrible night. About 6 months before Sarah disappeared completely, there had been a terrible argument, shouting, Sarah accusing the nanny of trying to steal her family. He had come home from work and found Sarah hysterical, saying she had sent that woman away for good. "Sarah fired you," David recalled slowly, the memories coming back in painful flashes. "There was a terrible fight. She said you were trying to take her place as Ethan's mother." Emily absorbed the information with a look of deep pain. "It's possible that this is true," she admitted. "Looking at these photos now, it's obvious that I loved Ethan as if he were my own son. Maybe I crossed some boundaries without realizing it." "Ethan was devastated," David continued, more memories emerging like a dam breaking. "He cried every night asking for Emily. Sarah became even more unstable after that, started drinking more, going out for long periods. 6 months later, she disappeared completely." They sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the weight of the revelations. Lily had fallen asleep in the stroller, gently swaying with the afternoon breeze that rustled the leaves of the trees above them. The distant sound of children playing in the park created a surreal contrast with the emotional intensity of the conversation. "David," Emily finally said, "there's one thing I need to ask you, and I ask that you be honest with me." He looked at her, bracing himself for another shock. "Lily," Emily said, looking at her sleeping daughter, "she is almost 6 months old now. That means she was conceived about 15 months ago." She paused, gathering courage. "Where were you 15 months ago?" David felt his mouth go dry. 15 months ago was a hazy time in his life, when he was going through a particularly difficult phase as a single father. There had been some nights out, a few casual encounters he preferred not to remember, desperate attempts to feel human again after years of loneliness and overwhelming responsibility. There were some nights out," he admitted hesitantly. "Bars, dates. Why are you asking this?" Emily took a deep breath and pulled out one last photograph from the envelope. This one, much more recent. It was an ultrasound of Lily still in the womb, but that wasn't it. He noticed something that caught his attention. It was the date in the corner of the image and a handwritten note. "Lily, 20 weeks. Father, DJ, Brooklyn." David picked up the photo with hands that trembled uncontrollably now. DJ were his initials, David Johnson, and he had lived in Brooklyn for years. "Emily," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What are you trying to tell me?" "I'm saying that maybe our connection is much deeper than we imagined," Emily replied, tears starting to stream down her face. "I'm saying that it's possible you are Lily's father." David's world seemed to come to a complete stop. He looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in the stroller and saw, for the first time, features that could be his. The shape of her nose, the line of her forehead, even the way she curled her tiny fingers was strangely familiar. "But how?" he began, his mind struggling to process the information. "I don't remember," Emily confessed. "That's the most frustrating part of all this. I don't remember how we met again. I don't remember being together. All I have are these photos, some notes in my journal that don't make much sense, and the certainty that you are the only man who could be her father." David abruptly stood up from the bench, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of total despair. "This is too much," he murmured, pacing in small circles. "This is too much to process." "I know," Emily said gently. "Believe me, I know. When I found these things this morning, I almost had a panic attack. But David, think about everything that has happened. Ethan's reaction. When he saw me, how he called me Mommy without ever consciously knowing me, the way Lily reacts to you, the dreams he has about a brown-haired woman who took care of him when he was little." David stopped walking and looked at her. "Are you suggesting that Ethan subconsciously remembers you?" "I'm suggesting that true love between a mother and child, even if it's not biological, doesn't simply disappear because someone says to," Emily replied, standing up as well. "I loved that boy with every fiber of my being for 2 years. I was the one who calmed him when he had nightmares, who sang him to sleep, who taught him his first words. That kind of bond doesn't fade away." "And Lily?" David asked, looking at the baby who had just woken up and was watching him with those intense blue eyes. "Lily is our daughter," Emily said with a certainty that surprised her. "I feel it in my heart, even without remembering how we got here. She is the connection that fate created to bring us back together." David approached the stroller slowly, as if he were approaching something sacred. Lily reached her tiny arms out toward him, and for the first time he didn't hesitate. He carefully picked her up and she snuggled against his chest as if it were the most natural place in the world for her to be. "My God," David whispered, feeling tears welling in his eyes. She seems to know me." "Because she does," Emily said softly, moving closer to them. "And now the question is, what are we going to do with this information?" David looked from Lily to Emily, his 2 daughters, because now he understood that was how he needed to think about and them. Ethan had lost a mother when Emily was forced to leave their lives, and he had lost a daughter when his memory was erased. But fate, in some mysterious way, had brought them back together. "We need to be sure," he finally said, "about Lily. A DNA test." Emily nodded. "I was already thinking about that. We can do it tomorrow." "And then?" David asked. Emily looked at him with a mix of hope and fear. "Then we try to rebuild our family, somehow." As the sun began to set over New York, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the 3 remained there in the park. A father, a mother, and a baby who might be the key to healing wounds that had been opened long ago. The future was uncertain, filled with unanswered questions and difficult conversations that would still need to happen. But for the first time in years, both David and Emily felt something they had completely forgotten what it was. Hope. Wednesday dawned with a light rain that covered New York like a grey cloak, creating that characteristic humidity that made car windows fog up and turned the streets into mirrors, reflecting the city's lights. David had spent the entire night awake, staring at the ceiling of his room while processing everything he had discovered the day before. From the next room, he could hear Ethan sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, as if the boy's subconscious knew that something important was about to be resolved. At 7 in the morning, his phone rang. It was Emily. "Hi," she said, her voice revealing that she too had spent a sleepless night. "I managed to schedule the test for today, at 2 in the afternoon at the Fleury lab. On Paulista, do you still want to do it?" David sat up in bed, running his hand through his messy hair. "Yes, I need to know the truth. Ethan needs to know the truth." "How is he today?" Emily asked, and David could hear the maternal anxiety in her voice. "Sleeping like an angel," David replied, looking through the slightly open door of his son's room. "Last night he told me he dreamed that the family was all together again. When I asked which family, he said, 'Me, Daddy, Mommy Emily, and little sister Lily.'" There was silence. On the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of Emily trying to hold back a sob. "David," she finally said, "regardless of what the test shows, I want you to You should know that these 2 days have been the most intense and revealing of my life. Even if Lily is not biologically yours—" "She is," interrupted David, with a conviction that surprised him. "I know she is. Last night, when I got home with her still on my mind, I took out some photos of myself when I was a baby. The similarities are undeniable." They agreed to meet at the lab and hung up. David took a shower, prepared Ethan's breakfast, and called Mark to let him know he would be late to the office for personal reasons. He didn't have the courage yet to explain to anyone the complexity of the situation he was in. On the other side of the city, Emily was going through her own morning ritual of preparing for a day that would change their lives. Lily had slept particularly well, as if she also sensed that something important was about to happen. While preparing the baby bottle for her daughter in the kitchen of her apartment, Emily watched the raindrops sliding down the window, creating abstract patterns that mirrored her confused mind. She had called her sister Beatrice again the night before, this time pressing for more details about the traumatic period. Beatrice had reluctantly shared that Emily had arrived in San Francisco that terrible night with more than just a head injury. She was visibly shaken, repeating that they took her boy away and that he would never remember how much she loved him. "You kept saying that Ethan was like your own son," Beatrice had told her. "You said that Sarah was neglecting him, that you were the one really taking care of the child. You also said you had fallen in love with someone, but that it was too complicated to work out." Now, preparing to find out if David was really Lily's father, Emily wondered if that someone she had fallen in love with was David himself. The timeline made sense. If she had left their home traumatized 5 years ago, and Lily had been conceived 15 months ago, there was a significant gap of time, enough time for their paths to cross again under circumstances her mind refused to remember. The Fleury lab on Avenue Paulista was bustling with the normal flow of people getting routine tests done. The modern building, with its glass walls and sterile environment, contrasted dramatically with the emotional intensity that David and Emily carried when they met in the lobby at 1:45 p.m. David had left Ethan with the neighbor, Ms. Johnson, a retired 70-year-old lady who lived in the same building and had become a sort of surrogate grandmother to the boy. Emily had brought Lily, who was peacefully sleeping in her baby stroller, protected from the rain by a clear plastic cover. "Ready?" David asked as they approached the reception desk. "As ready as one can be to find out if your whole life is about to change," Emily replied, trying to force a smile. The process was surprisingly simple and clinical. A kind nurse named Sandra led them to a small room where she collected saliva samples from both David and Lily using sterile swabs. The baby didn't even cry, just watched everything with her curious blue eyes. "The results will be ready in 72 hours, Sandra explained, carefully labeling the test tubes. "You'll receive an email, but you can also call to find out." 72 hours, David repeated as they left the lab. The rain had eased, but the sky remained grey and heavy. 3 days to find out if we are a family, Emily finished. They walked slowly down Avenue Paulista, with no specific destination, just needing to process what had just happened. The intense movement of pedestrians and the noise of traffic created an urban cacophony that shielded them from the need to fill the silence with words. It was David who finally broke the silence. "Emily, can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" She looked at him, carefully pushing Lily's stroller between the other pedestrians. "If Lily is my daughter, that means we met again 15 months ago. But you said you don't remember anything about that time. How is it possible to completely forget a relationship that resulted in a child?" Emily stopped walking, halting the stroller near a bookstore window. "I have a theory about that, but you might think it's crazy. After everything we've discovered in the last 2 days, I doubt anything could seem crazy to me, David said. Emily took a deep breath before continuing. I think my brain blocked those memories on purpose. Think about it. If I fell in love with you 15 months ago, and you were the father of the child I had cared for like my own, that would be emotionally devastating. Imagine finding out you're pregnant by the man you love, but he doesn't remember you. That Ethan doesn't remember you. David absorbed the theory, finding a disturbing logic in it. Maybe, Emily continued, I decided to raise Lily alone to protect us all. You were already dealing with being a single father to Ethan. I was trying to rebuild my life after the trauma of being separated from him. An unplanned pregnancy could complicate everything even more. But that would mean you went through the entire pregnancy alone, David said, the realization hitting him like a punch. Alone, knowing I was the father but unable to tell me. Tears began to stream down Emily's face. And maybe that's why Lily reacted so strongly to you. I must have talked about you throughout the pregnancy, told stories about her brother that I loved so much, about the father she had never known, but that I still loved. David felt his heart shatter. Emily. No, she said quickly, wiping her tears. Let's not lament decisions that were made to protect each other. If my theory holds, all right, I chose this path consciously. The question now is, what do we do from here? David looked at Lily, who had woken up and was watching him through the bars of the stroller. When he extended his finger, she grabbed it with her tiny hand, and he felt a connection that transcended any laboratory confirmation. From here on out, he said, we do what's best. For the kids, for Ethan and for Lily. And what if the test confirms she's your daughter? Asked Emily. David looked into her eyes, seeing not just the woman he had reconnected with in the park, but the person who had loved his son unconditionally and had carried their daughter in secret to protect them from more pain. Then we stop pretending to be strangers, he said, and we start figuring out how to be a family again. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking around the city, talking about fragmented memories, sharing stories about Ethan that Emily had forgotten and that David had tried to forget. It was as if they were piecing together a giant puzzle where each piece revealed a little more of a story that they both had lost at some point. When they finally parted ways at the end of the afternoon, they both knew that the next 3 days would be the longest of their lives. But for the first time, they had hope that the result would only confirm what their hearts already knew. They were a family that fate had brought together against all odds. That rainy Wednesday night, David told Ethan that maybe Lily was really his little sister. The boy's reaction was pure joy. I knew it, Dad. I always knew she was my sister. When can she come live with us? On the other side of the city, Emily was rocking Lily while singing a melody she had forgotten she knew, the same song about a little bird that Ethan had hummed days before. It was a song she had made up years ago to soothe a little boy who couldn't sleep, and now it came back naturally as she rocked her own daughter. The memories, it seemed, were starting to return. The 3 days of waiting for the DNA test results dragged on like an eternity, punctuated by small, everyday miracles. David found he couldn't concentrate on anything, neither work, nor daily responsibilities, nor even Ethan's needs. His mind constantly returned to Lily and the possibility that she was his biological daughter. On Thursday morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual and went to find David in the kitchen, already dressed for work but staring blankly at a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. "Dad," Ethan said, climbing onto the chair next to the table, "are you sad because Mom Emily isn't here?" The simple question from his son hit David right in the chest. Since the meeting at the lab, he had realized that he missed Emily in a way that went beyond curiosity about the test results. There was something comforting about her presence, a familiarity that transcended the time they had spent together recently. "I'm not sad, son," David gently lied. "I'm just thinking about a lot of things." "Can I call her?" Ethan asked, with that pure hope of children. "I want to talk to Lily." David hesitated. They had exchanged only a few text messages in the last 2 days, mainly to confirm that they were both okay and eagerly awaiting the results. But the idea of hearing Emily's voice that morning was strangely comforting. "Let's send a message first," David said, grabbing his phone. "See if she's awake." Emily's response came almost instantly. "Awake since 5 a.m. Lily didn't sleep well. Do you want to come over for coffee?" An hour later, David and Ethan were at the door of Emily's apartment in Brooklyn. It was the first time David had seen where she lived, and the environment revealed a lot about who she had become in recent years. The small but cozy apartment was decorated with children's drawings on the walls, photographs of Lily at various stages of growth, and a shelf full of carefully organized children's books. "What a beautiful place," David sincerely commented, observing how Emily had created a welcoming home for herself and Lily with limited resources. "Thank you," Emily replied, clearly nervous about his presence in her personal space. "It's not very big, but it's ours." Ethan, without any shyness, ran straight to the stroller where Lily was awake, observing everything, with her alert blue eyes. "Hi, little sister," Ethan said cheerfully, extending his finger for Lily to grab. The baby's reaction was immediate, a radiant smile that made Emily's heart race. "Look how she smiles at him," Emily murmured, watching the natural interaction between the two children. "It's as if they were really siblings," David completed, moving closer too. They spent the entire morning in the apartment, and for the first time since their meeting in the park, everyone seemed relaxed. Ethan played with Lily, making faces that made her giggle, while Emily prepared a homemade breakfast. Warm cinnamon rolls, freshly brewed coffee, and fruits cut into fun shapes for Ethan. David felt strangely at home in that environment. There was something in the way Emily moved around the kitchen, how she anticipated Lily's needs, how she naturally included Ethan in her activities that awakened fragmented memories he couldn't fully place. "Emily," he said during breakfast, "can I ask you a personal question?" She nodded, taking a sip of coffee, while watching Ethan make little airplanes with pieces of bread for Lily. "How did you manage to raise Lily all by yourself? I mean, financially, emotionally? It must have been very difficult." Emily's face slightly shadowed. "It was, especially in the first few months. I had to work until the 8th month of pregnancy, save every penny, prepare to be a single mother knowing that—" David paused, realizing he was about to reveal more than he intended. "Knowing what?" he asked gently. Emily looked at Ethan, who was completely absorbed in his play with Lily, then lowered her voice. "Knowing that maybe her father was just a few miles away, but I couldn't search for him." The confession created a heavy silence between them. David, he felt an overwhelming guilt at the possibility that Emily had gone through everything alone while he lived his normal life, unaware that he could have a daughter. "Why didn't you reach out to me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily closed her eyes for a moment as if battling painful memories. "Because I was afraid you wouldn't remember me. I was afraid that our connection was just something casual for you but too meaningful for me." David reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "Emily, if Lily is my daughter, and my heart tells me, as she is, then whatever happened between us was not casual. People don't forget casual connections. People block memories of things that are too important to process." On Friday, Emily finally had her appointment with Dr. James Wilson, the neuropsychiatrist who had managed to fit her into his schedule. The office was located in a corporate building in Midtown Manhattan, with modern yet cozy decor aimed at soothing anxious patients. Dr. Wilson was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a calming presence that immediately put Emily at ease. She had brought all the photographs and fragments of memories she had gathered, spreading them across his desk like evidence of a life she had forgotten. Selective traumatic amnesia, the doctor diagnosed after hearing the whole story and examining the evidence. It's not as rare as people think. The human mind has an extraordinary ability to protect itself from memories it considers excessively painful. "But why do I remember some things and not others?" Emily asked. "Generally, the mind preserves memories it considers safe and blocks those associated with intense emotional trauma," Dr. Wilson explained. "In your case, you remember caring for the boy because those were happy memories, but you blocked the traumatic separation and may have subsequently blocked the romantic relationship out of fear of reliving the pain of the first loss. Is it possible to recover those memories? Possible, yes, but it's a process that can be emotionally intense. Generally, memories start to return naturally when the person feels safe enough to process them." When Emily left the office, she felt simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. Having a medical explanation for her amnesia reassured her, but the prospect of recovering painful memories frightened her. Saturday arrived with a bright sun that seemed to intentionally contrast with the anxiety dominating both David and Emily. It was the day the DNA results would be ready, and both had woken up early, unable to sleep. David was at the park with Ethan, the same park where everything had begun a week earlier. The boy was happily playing on the equipment, occasionally asking if Mommy, Emily and Lily would come to meet them. At 11 a.m., David's phone rang. It was the lab. "Mr. David Johnson, this is Sandra from Manhattan Lab. Could you come pick up the paternity test results, or would you prefer we send them by email?" David's hands trembled as he held the phone. Can you give me a hint about the result?" "Sir, our policy is to deliver results in person or in writing, but I can confirm that the test was conclusive." "Conclusive," David repeated, his heart racing. He hung up and immediately called Emily. "The result is ready. They said it's conclusive." "I'm on my way to the lab," Emily said, her voice tense but determined. An hour later, they were back in the waiting room of Manhattan Lab, this time accompanied by the two children. Ethan had insisted on coming, as if sensing that something important was about to be revealed. Lily was restless in the stroller, as if she also felt the tension in the air. Sandra greeted them with a professional smile and led them to the same room where she had collected the samples. She held a sealed envelope containing the answer to a question that had dominated their lives for the past week. "Before I open this," David said, looking at Emily, "I want you to know that regardless of what this paper says, nothing will change how I feel about Lily. She is already my daughter in every way that matters." Emily nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "And you are already her father. The test will only confirm what our hearts already know." Sandra carefully opened the envelope and pulled out an official sheet. Her eyes scanned the document quickly before looking at them with a genuine smile. "Probability of paternity, 99.97%, she announced. "Mr. David, you are, without a doubt, Lily's biological father." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of Lily gurgling happily in the stroller, as if she knew an important question had been resolved. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "I knew it. I knew she was my little sister." David looked at Emily, seeing his own emotions reflected on her face: relief, joy, fear, and an overwhelming sense that their lives had changed forever in that moment. "We are a family," Emily whispered, the words coming out like a prayer. We always were, David replied, reaching out to embrace all his most important people. We just needed to find our way back to each other. As they hugged in the small lab room, with Ethan jumping for joy and Lily smiling at everyone, a sense of completeness that none of them had felt in years finally filled their hearts. The journey to rebuild their family was just beginning, but now they knew that they were on the right track. Trying again. Chapter 9. Memories Returning. 2 weeks after the DNA test confirmation, everyone's life had transformed into a delicate dance of rediscovery. David had started visiting Emily and Lily every day after work, and on weekends they spent time together as a family, learning to be a family again. Ethan was radiant, finally having his mommy Emily and his little sister in his daily life. It was a rainy Thursday when the first memory came rushing back. Emily was preparing dinner in her small kitchen, with Lily in the baby seat on the table and David helping Ethan with his homework in the living room. The aroma of sautéed garlic and onion wafted through the apartment, mixed with the sound of rain tapping against the window and Ethan's laughter as David helped him with a drawing for school. Suddenly, while stirring the tomato sauce on the stove, Emily was hit by a memory so vivid that she dropped the spoon and leaned against the sink, gasping. It was a December night 15 months ago. She was in a bar in Brooklyn, The Branch, celebrating the birthday of an old college friend. The music was loud, people were chatting animatedly, and she had drunk more wine than usual. Across the bar, a familiar man was watching her with an expression of recognition mixed with disbelief. "Emily?" He had approached hesitantly, as if unsure she was real. "Emily, is that really you?" When she turned around, her heart stopped. It was David. More mature, with some lines on his face that hadn't been there 5 years before, but it was definitely David, the father of Ethan, the man she had silently fallen in love with during the 2 years she had cared for his son. "David," she had whispered, and then they stood there, frozen in the middle of the noisy bar, looking at each other as if they were ghosts from each other's past. "Emily, are you okay?" David's voice in the present brought her back abruptly. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her with concern. I remembered," Emily whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "About the bar, the branch, about how we reconnected." David slowly approached, as if getting closer to something fragile that might break. "The branch? I remember that place. I used to go there sometimes when I needed to get out of the house." "It was December," Emily continued, the images becoming clearer in her mind. "Patricia's birthday, my college friend. You were with some friends at the corner table near the window." David's eyes widened. "My God, I remember that. I thought I was imagining things. You were wearing a dark blue dress and your hair was different, shorter." "You came up to me," Emily recalled, the memory unfolding like a movie in her mind. "And we talked for hours about Ethan, about how I had disappeared from his life, about how you had become a single father." "And you cried," David whispered, his own memory being awakened. "You said you missed him every day, that you were afraid he had forgotten you." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And you said he hadn't forgotten, that he still talked about Emily sometimes, especially when he was sad or scared." They stood in silence for a moment, both processing the intensity of the memory that had returned. From the living room, they could hear Ethan telling a story to Lily, his little voice creating a touching contrast with the emotional intensity in the kitchen. "What else do you remember?" David asked gently. Emily closed her eyes, allowing the memories to flow. "We left the bar together. It was raining like today. You offered me a ride, but I said I lived too far away. Then you suggested we go get coffee somewhere that was open late." "The 24-hour bakery on Augusta," David recalled. We stayed there until 4 in the morning talking. About everything, Emily continued. About how our separation had been traumatic for everyone. About how Mary had become unstable afterward. About how you had tried to be both father and mother to Ethan alone. She paused, more memories surfacing. And about how we both had never managed to form other serious relationships because we never forgot the connection we had. David moved closer, gently touching her arm. You said that night that you had loved me in silence all the time you worked for us, that you never said anything because I was with Mary and because you didn't want to complicate Ethan's life. And you said you had felt something too, Emily remembered, her voice growing stronger, that you always wondered if the feelings you had for me were appropriate, considering you were committed and I was your son's babysitter. The memories now flowed like a dam that had burst. Emily remembered how they had met several times in the weeks following that first reunion. Walks in Central Park, the same place where years later Ethan would run to her. Prolonged coffees at Mr. Baker's bakery, endless conversations about the possibility of trying to build something together. But I was scared, Emily recalled, leaning against the kitchen counter, afraid that if things went wrong between us, I would lose Ethan again. Afraid that you wouldn't be able to see me as anything more than your former babysitter. And I was afraid I wouldn't be good enough for you, David confessed, that you deserved someone who could offer you a more stable life, someone who didn't come with the baggage of being a single father. The most crucial memory was now emerging, clear as crystal. One night in January, 2 months. After the reunion, when they had finally overcome all their fears and allowed themselves to be together, a night of emotional and physical connection so intense that Emily immediately knew something special had happened. The night Sophia was conceived, Emily whispered. I knew at that moment that something had changed, not just physically but emotionally. I knew I was pregnant even before taking the test. And then you disappeared, said David, his voice heavy with pain. I tried to contact you for weeks, but you didn't respond to messages, didn't answer calls. Emily closed her eyes, the most painful part of the memory finally surfacing. Because I panicked. I found out I was pregnant and went into total panic mode. All my insecurities came rushing back, multiplied by 1,000. I thought you would think I got pregnant on purpose to trap you. I thought you would see the pregnancy as a complication in your already complex life. So you decided to raise Sophia alone. I decided to protect you from the responsibility of another unplanned child, Emily corrected, and I decided to protect myself from the possibility of being rejected again. David took her hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. Emily, if you had told me about the pregnancy, I would have stood by your side. I would have been the present father that Sophia deserved from day one. I know that now, Emily admitted. But at the time, my fear was stronger than my logic. I had lost Ethan once for falling in love with the wrong family. I didn't want to risk losing you both by making the wrong choice again. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, holding Sophia in his arms, something he had learned to do carefully in recent weeks, and watching the two adults with curiosity. Why are you crying? He asked with the frankness of children. Emily and David exchanged glances, realizing they both had tears in their eyes, but they were tears of relief, understanding, and healing. We're crying because we're happy, David explained, bending down to be at Ethan's level. Mommy Emily remembered some important things about our family. Good things? Ethan asked, adjusting Sophia in his small but determined arms. Very good things, Emily confirmed, joining them. Things that explain why you always knew Sophia was your little sister and why you recognized me at the park. Ethan beamed. I told you we were a family. Now do you believe me? That night, after Ethan fell asleep and Sophia was peacefully resting in her crib, Emily and David stayed in the living room talking late into the night. Memories kept flooding back in waves, filling in the gaps of a year and a half that had been erased by emotional trauma. "You know what's the strangest thing?" Emily said, snuggled up next to David on the small sofa. "Now that I remember everything, I can see how every decision I made, even the ones that seemed destructive, was trying to protect our family. And how fate found a way to bring us together anyway," David added, kissing the top of her head, "through a 4-year-old who refused to forget about love." From the bedroom they could hear Sophia making little sleeping noises, and from the other room, Ethan's calm breathing. For the first time in years, everyone was where they were meant to be. The memories had returned, but more importantly, the family had reunited. 6 months after the revelation at the lab, the house in Brooklyn that David had bought to accommodate his reunited family was finally taking shape. It was a sunny September Sunday morning, and the backyard garden was blooming with the same yellow flowers that Sarah had planted years ago. But now they carried a completely different meaning. They were symbols of renewal, not loss. Emily was in the kitchen preparing Sunday lunch, a tradition they had established since officially moving in together 3 months earlier. The aroma of baked chicken and beans filled the house, mingling with the sounds of Ethan playing with Sophia on the living room rug. At 10 months, Sophia was already trying to crawl and loved it when her older brother made funny faces and sounds for her. "Dad!" Ethan shouted from the living room. "Sophia is trying to talk. Come see." David, who was assembling a new crib in what would be Sophia's permanent room, dropped the screwdriver and rushed to the living room. He found Ethan sitting on the floor, with Sophia in his lap, both looking expectantly at him. "Say it, Sophia. Say Ethan," encouraged the boy, now 5 years old and extremely protective of his little sister. Sophia looked at Ethan with her bright blue eyes, and to everyone's astonishment clearly babbled, "Ethan!" Ethan's joyful shout echoed throughout the house. "She said my name. She said my name first!" Emily rushed from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, and arrived just in time to see Sophia repeat "Ethan" once more, this time looking directly at her brother with a radiant smile. "First word," David whispered, feeling his eyes fill with tears, "and it was her brother's name." "As it should be," Emily said, embracing the 2 men in her life while watching Sophia clap her hands, proud of her new skill. The doorbell rang at that moment, interrupting the family celebration. It was Jessica, Emily's sister, who had come from San Francisco to officially meet David and Ethan. In recent months, she had become a regular presence in their lives, helping Emily process the memories that kept returning and offering the family support that they had all lost over the years. "Did I arrive at the right time?" Jessica asked, observing the family scene with a warm smile. At 38, she was taller than Emily, with darker brown hair and a practical way of dealing with life that perfectly complemented her sister's more dreamy nature. "Sophia said her first word," she announced. Ethan ran to hug his aunt, who had quickly become one of his favorite people. "She said my name." "How smart," said Patricia, picking up Lily. "She knows who the most important person in her life is, doesn't she?" During lunch, the conversation flowed naturally between stories from the past and plans for the future. Patricia shared memories of Emily as a child that made Ethan laugh out loud, while David talked about the early months as a single father, helping Patricia understand better the man her sister had chosen. "You know," said Patricia during dessert, "I was really worried when Emily called me 6 months ago talking about you two. After everything that had happened, I was afraid she was deluding herself, creating connections that didn't exist." "And now?" David asked, curious about his sister-in-law's opinion. "Now I see that you two are one of those families that fate insists on keeping together, no matter how many obstacles appear along the way," Patricia replied, watching Ethan help Lily clap in her high chair. "You belong to each other in a way that goes beyond any logic." After lunch, While Patricia helped Emily wash the dishes and David played with the kids in the yard, the conversation turned to more serious matters. "Pat," Emily said, drying a plate, "there's something I never told you about Sarah." Patricia stopped washing and looked at her sister. "What?" "In the last few weeks, some memories about her have come back. Memories that explain a lot about why our separation was so traumatic." Emily paused, organizing her thoughts. "Sarah was struggling with serious alcoholism when I worked there, and I think she was neglecting Ethan." "What do you mean, neglecting?" "Leaving him alone for hours, forgetting to feed him, not changing his diapers. That's why I ended up becoming more than just a babysitter. I became his primary caregiver because someone needed to be." Emily sighed deeply. "The night I was fired, I confronted Sarah about it. I told her she needed to seek help or I would have to report the situation." Patricia nodded slowly. "And she felt threatened." "More than that, she realized I loved Ethan more than she could love him, and that made her furious." Emily looked out the kitchen window, watching David push Ethan on the swing they had installed in the backyard tree. "When David came home that night and found the argument, Sarah accused me of trying to steal her family. She said I had fallen in love with David and was using Ethan to get to him." "And was it true? About you being in love with David?" Emily smiled sadly. "It was, but not in the way she thought. I fell in love with him because I saw how he loved Ethan, how he genuinely cared for his son's well-being, even when Sarah couldn't. I fell in love with the idea of a family where a child would be truly loved and protected." "And now you have that," Patricia observed. "Now we all have." "That," Emily corrected, "all of us." As the sun began to set, painting the New York sky in golden and pink hues, the whole family gathered in the yard. Ethan had convinced the adults to have a picnic on the lawn, and they were spread out on a colorful blanket, with Lily crawling among them and exploring every blade of grass she could reach. "Remember the first day at the park?" David suddenly asked, watching Lily discover a fallen yellow flower. "Like it was yesterday," Emily replied. "Ethan running to me as if I were the answer to a prayer." "I really was," Ethan said seriously, lifting his eyes from the book he was flipping through. "I prayed every night for my mommy Emily to come back, and she did." "With an extra surprise," David added, tickling Lily, who giggled joyfully. Patricia watched the whole scene with the gaze of someone who had witnessed an extraordinary transformation. "You know you're going to have to tell this story to Lily when she grows up, right?" "It's a beautiful story," Emily said, picking up Lily. "It's a story about how true love always finds a way to win, and about how sometimes kids know things that adults have forgotten," David added, hugging Ethan. "And about how families can be created in ways no one expects," Patricia completed. When the first stars began to appear in the New York sky, they finally gathered the picnic and went inside. Ethan helped give Lily a bath, a nighttime routine that had become sacred to him. David read stories to both, while Emily prepared the baby bottles and organized the clothes for the next day. That night, after the kids fell asleep, Emily and David stayed on the back porch, watching the yellow flowers that glowed softly under the moonlight. "I have a confession to make," David said, hugging Emily from behind. "What?" "I dreamed of you too. All these years. I dreamed of a woman with brown hair who appeared in my dreams taking care of Ethan, singing to him, making him laugh. I could never see her face clearly in the dreams, but the feeling was always the same." "What feeling?" "Completeness," David said, "as if she were the missing piece to make our family work perfectly." Emily turned in his arms, looking into the almond-shaped eyes that had become her anchor in recent months. "And now?" "Now, I don't need to dream anymore," he replied, kissing her softly, "because everything I've ever wanted is right here." From the children's room, they could hear Lily making little sleep noises and Ethan whispering, "Good night, little sister. Tomorrow we'll play more, okay?" Emily and David smiled, knowing that their lives had finally found the balance they had always sought. The yellow flowers in the garden continued to sway gently in the night breeze, silent witnesses to a family that had been formed, separated by trauma, reunited by destiny, and strengthened by the unconditional love of a child who refused to forget. In the apartment in Brooklyn, now empty but filled with happy memories, a single photograph remained on the refrigerator. The image of Emily, David, Ethan, and Lily in the lab on the day they discovered they were a family. It was proof that some miracles truly happen, and that some love stories are so powerful that not even time and trauma can destroy them. The journey had ended where it began, with a child calling Mommy to the person who always knew she loved him, but this time no one needed to run after him to bring him back. This time, everyone was finally home.